the love of Christ, the wonder-working power of the Holy Spirit. I refer to them as the dynamic duo. And there is no greater dynamic duo for anyone looking to move forward into a new life, to move forward into a new way of living. The encounter Jesus had with the woman at the well in Samaria makes me think of that missionizing spirit that has surfaced in certain areas but needs to resurface in all of our churches today. Jesus drove the religious establishment of his time absolutely crazy because of what he did and the people he associated with. And this story is a prime example. Here he is talking to a woman. First strike. He's talking to her in public. Not only is he talking to a woman in public, she's a Samaritan. Strike two. Samaritans were kind of like intermarried people with the Jews. They had some of the Jewish religious things that they did in ritual, but it was sort of blended, if you will, with some of the prior religion, which was pagan. So they were considered unclean by the Jews. And that's why the Jews didn't typically go through that portion of Samaria to get to where they were going. They took the longer route around, so they would not be tainted. Okay, so the woman in public, he's talking to her, she's a Samaritan, 2 strikes. Third strike, she is a woman of very questionable moral character. We heard her story. 5 husbands. Well, part of the problem with that is, at that particular point in Jewish history, you are allowed to be married 3 times. After that, you were supposed to remain a widow or divorced, whatever the case. So she's been married 5 times, and the man she's living with is not her husband. Strike 3, Jesus, at least as far as the Jews were concerned. Jesus had a conversation with her. And many scholars who have looked at that interaction between Jesus and the Samaritan lady at the well see some playfulness in this encounter. Playfulness in the wordplay and talking. Not only does Jesus tell her all about her life, but he goes on to reveal to her who he is, the reality of him being Messiah. He tells her the truth of his identity. He then entrusts her to go back to the village and to proclaim to everybody the good news of his coming. Now, that's not amazing and astounding. I don't know. Jesus, as he talks with her, he addresses her as woman. And the Greek word that he uses in this context is G-U-N-E, gune. Well, it's a term of endearment. It's not just woman. It's the same word he used when he was talking to his mother at the wedding of Cana. It's the same word he used talking about his mother while he's hanging on the cross. It's a term of endearment. It's kind of like saying to someone, "Oh, special lady. What a wonderful lady. You're special." So he's telling this lady who goes to the well at noon because she doesn't want to associate, or she's maybe perhaps not even allowed to associate. She's probably ostracized by the other women in the village because of her character. So she goes to the well at noon, the hottest part of the day. Most of the women came either in the morning or in the late evening, or at dusk when it was cooler. So he's calling this lady who is sort of an outcast in her own community, special lady. She is considered by many scholars, and I think rightfully so, as being the first evangelist. Because what does she do after her conversation with Jesus? After she is convinced, she gets that feeling, she runs back and starts telling her village, hey, come, meet a man who has told me everything I've ever done. And then she sort of poses the question, he cannot be the Messiah, or can he? She must believe something about him. She said he was a prophet. And then at the end of the story, we find that other villagers say, we no longer believe in him because of what you said. We believe because we have heard for ourselves. So she truly has been acting as an evangelist. He offered her living water. And he offers that same living water to all of us. The church needs to resurrect that missionary spirit that Jesus entrusted to her. You know, in the postmodern world of the 21st century, I think we need to find new modes of expression which may involve new roles for the church. I'm not talking about those good cinnamon rolls we did. Church has a role to play in whatever community it's in. It may be slightly different in the communities. And it may evolve over time. You know, satellites and microchips intimately bind together cultures from around the world, peoples from different countries, economic systems. We're all bound up together. Just look at the world economy and how interrelated all the stuff that has taken place over the last 3 years tells us. Look what happens when there's a war in the Middle East. Our oil prices go up. We are connected like never before. We need to be able to. I read something by Frederick Buechner, and I know some of you know who he is, great theologian, pastor. Frederick Buechner used a sort of a metaphor. He compared the world to just one gigantic spider web. And he says, if you touch it anywhere, you set the whole thing trembling. Now, I don't know about you guys and ladies when you were growing up, but I used to spend summers with my grandmothers out in the country. And if there was one thing I dearly loved, it was finding an orb spider web. Oh, they're so perfect. And then you can see where they repaired it in the spot. I would see it because I would take a stick and make a break one. And the next day I'd come back and it would be repaired. I never destroyed the whole thing because I really liked them. But I used to catch bugs. You know, I'd go along the edge of the house and around the flower beds, and I'd find a bug and I'd throw it in that spider web. And when it hit, the whole web would wiggle. And that's when you'd see the spider jet out. Because sometimes I didn't even see the spider. In the orbs, they usually hang out in the very middle, but in some of these other spider webs, they'd come crawling out from under an eave or something, or behind a piece of wood. And I was just enthralled by watching that. And it makes perfect sense for Mr. Buechner to use that. Because we are like that as people around our world. Something happens in the Middle East, the web is shaking, and it finally gets to us. There's a tsunami in Japan. The waves trickle to California and beyond and other places. If a nuclear reactor blows up somewhere on the other side of the world, the winds eventually will send detectable, although, as we're certainly told, not harmful amounts. But just the idea that it does get here tells you how connected we are. He goes on to say, as we move around this world, we act with kindness. As we act with kindness. And think about this, as I was talking to the children this morning about Jesus. As we move around this world, as we act with kindness or indifference or hostility toward the people we meet, we are setting the great spider web a-trembling. The life that we touch today, for good or for ill, will in turn touch another life, which in turn will touch another life. So, whatever we did is going to affect one person at least. And that person is going to feel that and may act in a not good way to someone else. And it goes on and on and on until who knows when that trembling is finally going to stop. Who knows where and what far place our initial touch will be felt. Another way of looking at it is the butterfly effect. Butterfly in South America flaps its wing. It does something across the world. Living in the web of interconnectedness should break down all these artificial barriers that we've raised. Barriers of class, barriers of race, barriers of gender, barriers of nationality, and a whole host of other barriers you can think of. All these things separate us from one another. And part of opening the church to new ways of expression and new roles lies in the church's ability to recognize the face of Christ and the work of the Holy Spirit in new and different ways, in a myriad of ways. We must understand that the Christian church is going to look different in an Asian culture. It's going to look different in an African culture. And yes, it looks different in a Samaritan culture. Please do not leave here today frightened by this next sentence. The Christian church may also need to step outside of its safe, comfortable cocoon that we find ourselves in, especially in America. You know, you've heard this before. Sunday is probably, and still is, I heard it when I was growing up, it's the most segregated day of the week. Now, it's by choice in a lot of instances. So I'm not trying to lay guilt on anybody. I grew up in the South and I visited with sort of a mixture, African American and Caucasian church. We all lived in the same area. We were neighbors. But that's not the norm. We have to step outside of our comfortable cultural cocoon. A lot of studies have been done and surveys have been taken, and they all conclude that younger people, those people that we don't see in a lot of churches today, generally speaking, these young people are not anti-religious. They're very spiritual. They're seeking some spirituality. They're seeking something in a religious nature. They just don't feel they can find it in our traditional churches. They may be just outside our doors, panting for that living water that Jesus is willing to provide. But they need it to be poured out from different containers, ones that they can grasp. The church needs to find new ways to introduce the dynamic duo that is the love of Christ and the power of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Responsive hymn. It's in the little black book, Faith We Sing.